word is called exulansis. It means to give up trying to talk about an experience because people are simply unable to relate to it. There seems to be a lot of that going on in this generation, and sometimes the only effective communication is using your feet. I've been a member of the ICOC family of churches for over 32 years, and I am a witness and a participant to nearly the entire history of this ministry. And I've faithfully devoted my life to it, and I've served in just about every capacity available here. So it's safe to say that I absolutely love my church. Yet as of this recording, I'm leaving it. And we've been through a lot together, so I think that you deserve to know why, and there's two issues. And I want you to know about them because I believe that they affect the future of our church. And I hope that my experience with these issues, I hope they may be helpful in navigating your future decisions. And to explain it, I'm going to have to give you a little bit of background, so please bear with me. In 2020, when all the racial upheaval started, it occurred to me that our church was woefully ill-equipped and uneducated about the realities of the Black community. And at first I said to myself, oh my God, these people have no idea how hurtful their words were and how painful this journey has been. The neglect, the traumas, and the abuses that white people never really have to see, and how that affects how Black people interact with the kingdom. Nobody's ever taught them. It wasn't everybody, but it was enough to do damage that I didn't deserve. And so I believe that if we just educated people on these issues, they would naturally treat the Black communities with more thoughtfulness and consideration. Acts chapter 6, verse 1 through 7 teaches us that when there is a problem, specifically where racial communities are neglected, you bring it up to the leadership, there's an immediate public response, and there's a corrective plan of action to fix it, including accountable, spiritual, wise, and respected people set in place to see to it that the job gets done. I believe that would be the case here. Why wouldn't it be? That is until I tried. And long story short, the only thing I've ever really asked about race for our fellowship is to be educated about the Black community, to develop a better and wiser understanding of the people that we're accountable for, so that we don't drive away the people we're supposed to be keeping faithful. I was taught that disciples are teachable and they're moldable, but my efforts to get us there have resulted in more than 4 years of being fought against, resisted, criticized, ignored, gaslit, undermined, minimized, delayed, given excuses and justifications as to why this should not be our concern. I've been calling for education as a means of becoming better missionaries, and the overall response that I've been getting is that it's too much of the church to ask. Why is that? We are experts at uncomfortable and hard topics like finances, purity, masturbation even, and we can talk about just about every sin under heaven, but not this? Why? It didn't make any sense to me. And I've spent countless hours trying to answer that question. And for a long time, I thought it was racism, just plain and simple. And to an extent, I still do. But here's my first issue. Whatever the reason it is, I believe that the ICOC as an organization has an unfaithful, disobedient lack of devotion towards its Black community. And we can feel it. Don't get me wrong, there's a lot of love and there's a lot of sacrifice here. And some people have made a lot of effort to understand the situation, to understand me. But this is a systemic lack of devotion of an entire organization. So 1, 2, or 3 people who care don't offset the devastating impact of an entire belief system that doesn't. I know this might be a little confusing because on the surface, there's a ton of devotion in this church. It's just conditional. There's a very clear line where that stops. And that line has caused a lot of pain for people that we are all sent to save. And wherever that devotion stops, there is no concern. And where there is no concern, there'll be no education. And where there's no education, there can't be any understanding, wisdom, or discernment. And that makes it impossible to recognize or respond when acts of devotion from the whole community are required. And that's why the response in 2020 did so much damage church-wide to the Black people. It was because that devotion that God commands wasn't there. So let's talk about that. In Philippians chapter 2, verse 3, it says, "In humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of others." And the word interests, it suggests issues pertaining to people's general well-being, not just what pertains to church activity or what we define as spiritual issues. Devotion was applied to every aspect of life that they were experiencing at the time. For example, all the great things that happened in Acts chapter 2, verse 42 through 47. The power of the first century church right there. That was the direct result of their devotion to each other. It wasn't just doctrine or baptisms. It was because the entire community put the interests of others above their own, no matter what it was. It says here that they sold property and possessions to give to anyone as he had need. Now, property doesn't have much to do with spirituality. And the same thing happened in Acts 6 when they fed the Hellenistic widows. Food doesn't have much to do with spirituality either. The spirituality here is found in the giving of their time, effort, and resources for the general well-being of the people. Meeting a human need will always be a spiritual act. That's what devotion looks like. And caring enough to educate oneself about the Black experience in this church is just as spiritual as selling property and possessions or the giving of food. Why? Because they needed you to do it, and you graciously responded. Well, that was what we were supposed to do. 2020 was a very dark moment in American history, and Black Christians needed a church that wouldn't let them walk through that darkness alone, to stand up for them when no one else would. And as churches, we wouldn't do it. You see, many Christians justified it because they think that race issues are all about politics and therefore inherently unspiritual. But politics doesn't make a thing unspiritual necessarily, but a lack of devotion always will. It's what keeps one from action when there's a need. So let me just be careful to point this out though. The way it shows up in how the church neglects the Black community, it looks like racism on the surface. But the root issue is a lack of devotion to your own people. And when you look around, I think you'll see the same lack of devotion showing up in other ways as well in our church culture. There's a lot of different kinds of people and a lot of different kinds of issues being left out, left behind, marginalized, and unattended here. You know, we preach about love and we say that we care, but biblical devotion is about caring enough to do exactly what the situation calls for. And in the first century, devotion called for the selling of homes, selling of property, and feeding widows. In 2020, it called for education. And we didn't listen to it then, and 4 years later, we are still resistant to giving those issues the attention they deserve. The second issue that I have is that I have yet to discover an iteration of leadership over the past 4 years that is prepared to address this lack of devotion. We're just kind of sitting there letting it happen, largely because many of us don't believe that these topics are the concern of the gospel. What does that even mean? Let me explain. We Christians talk a lot about loving one another and the spiritual values, but the way that we define those things have these unwritten qualifiers and restrictions to them. What I mean is that we have what looks to me like this list of pre-approved subjects that qualify for biblical spirituality in our minds. There's about 12 of them. And just about every sermon that you hear falls into one of these categories. If a person's life focus falls outside of these topics, it's considered a distraction, and we're excused from applying our devotion to it. It's not that these topics are unbiblical. They're biblical. It's just not all of them. What we adhere to is this incomplete collection of biblical commands. And we do so in a way that is so rigid and inflexible that it cripples us from applying other commands that are just as biblical. The subject matter that addresses the Black experience hasn't appeared in a sermon to my recollection in any meaningful way for the 32 years that I've been here. Justice, a major priority of God, and it's not on this approval list, and therefore unspiritual. And I want you to take note when people use that term, because what they're doing is telling you not to deviate from this list. And when you arbitrarily define terms like that, it eventually leads people to believe that they're free from obligation to whatever's not on that made-up list. So let me be clear, I don't sense hate or evil here, but that doesn't make it any less tragic. We say that we believe in the whole Bible, but that's not what this is. And here's my point, and here's my plea. This belief system is preventing us from loving as many people as God intended, in my opinion. And it's undoing decades of missionary work, driving away souls that God has sent to His church to care for, simply by withholding our devotion to them. And my plea is this: stop it. Let in the rest of the commands of God so that we can get to the work that we're supposed to be doing. I believe that we expect far too little from each other in our missionary training. Tell me something. How is it possible to reach all nations without taking the time to learn about what those nations are actually living through? Here's what I mean. What evangelist teaches us how to minister to a Black man in a white world navigating Jesus' mission when he's beat down from enduring oppressive and white-centered systems coming from the world and from inside of his church home? What church example shows us how to use the scriptures to navigate that darkness? And which elder helps the white people understand and support that struggle? What teacher teaches that solid, practical, spiritual direction that brings awareness and change to a church paradigm that doesn't speak on these things? What would Jesus do about that? I know these questions are hard, and I don't expect white people to just magically know those answers, but they might get it if they were educated about it. Listen, whatever you don't teach about the Black experience, the American media and political system are sitting right there, happy to step in and do it for you, teaching all the wrong things. And church, I really don't appreciate how comfortable you seem to be, leaving it to them to teach our movement about me or my people, because they get it wrong consistently. And Black people are the ones who got to deal with that misinformation, both outside and inside of the church. And without a good and accurate education about the Black experience in our churches, you're gonna keep hurting and damaging the faith of people that you love. And the worst part about it is, in ignorance, you won't even know what you did wrong before they're gone. That's what a lack of education does. That's what a lack of devotion to your own people does. And I have never been successful at convincing our leadership to engage this in any meaningful way. My overall experience with leadership. I don't know if anybody would say this out loud, but it seems to me to be based on an assumption that since God is perfect and we follow God, the system of worship that we follow must also be perfect too. So if there's a problem with it, it must be you. And it creates this strange matrix-like compulsion to fix whoever isn't compliant with the system. And that's the approach that's generally taken towards me. It's like, if we can get Justin's attitude under control, the problem would be like 99% fixed. I mean, he's angry, his tone is all wrong. And if we fix that, then we can get it back to essentially that same 12-topic spirituality system that we've been pushing for the last 45 years. Some people say that we shouldn't engage in the racial topic because it's divisive. It's not divisive, it's divergent. It deviates from the rigid assumption that spirituality is defined by this incomplete system of 12 Bible topics. Life is far more complicated than that. And just like in the Matrix, the goal is to figure out how to use these scriptures to help Justin live in that illusion, to make peace with the fact that the ICOC has no ministerial interest or a plan to address the Black experience in this church. I don't think that's the cognitive goal, but that's what the approach I've experienced generally amounts to when it comes to race. And this approach has communicated to me that my church is devoted to me as long as I fit into its narrowly defined system, keeping the life that I'm actually experiencing to myself. And the second I break that silence, that's where the trouble begins. Some say, well, racism is just not an appropriate topic for a church service setting. Where do you think I learned how to function in a white church culture? At home? Listen, a biblically devoted community would not put their oppressed and marginalized members in the position to have to fight them for what the dominant culture is already enjoying here. Social acceptance, systemic support, representation, cultural understanding, the list goes on. And I've had to fight too many people, far too often, for way too long, for something that the Bible promises, devotion, that I still have yet to receive. I've given the best of what I have to this church, 32 years of my life, my family, my time, my home, my creativity, all to God in unbroken, devoted, and faithful service. And I'm leaving it now because I've finally been convinced that that kind of mutual devotion is simply not available to me here. And let's think about this for a second, guys. Seriously, in terms of our God-given mission, if the subject matter of my life is not appropriate to bring into your church environment, why should I come? Why should I stay? Why should any Black person expect spiritual help about the life they're actually experiencing here? Guys, that literally shoots our mission in the foot. The bottom line here is that I can't function in a relationship like that and stay healthy at the same time. My mental health, my relationship with God, my connection with my family, all have been weakened as a result of this environment. And I can't keep doing it. If an education about the Black experience in this church is too much to ask, then I'm going to go and give my precious time and my talent to those from whom it is not too much to ask. I'm going to go find or create an environment where a person's whole journey towards Jesus can be welcomed and ministered to openly, even one as difficult as the Black community has to face. Jesus said, where 2 or 3 gather together in my name, there I am with them. And if 2 or 3 is all I can find, then so be it. That's my church. I believe that biblical devotion can fix all of these challenges. But resistance to education, inflexibility to change, and unresponsiveness to people's needs, those things impugn every word you preach, making every sermon you preach yet another brick that you're tearing down from what you've built. And without biblical devotion, the powerful story of Acts 2, it just isn't available to all of us. And I want all of us to be able to share that, because I believe that those who are ready to embrace that, they're going to be the first to discover what God holds for our future. But this doesn't come by force, and I can't fight you for this, so I have to go. I had to make a choice. And we're all going to eventually have to choose whether or not we're going to be devoted to a church culture or a system here, or are we going to be devoted to each other? I'm choosing each other, but I can only do that when it's mutual. I'm your brother. I love you, and I've been devoted to you for 32 years. And because of that, if you really need me for anything, I'll be there for you. But I believe that this relationship will be restored whenever this devotion is mutual. So if you're interested in that, the need of the moment here is for you to learn about the oppression that I and my people have experienced and how that's influenced our church's policy, its perspective, and social structure. And the purpose of doing that is so that we can make different choices about how we interact with each other and how we govern our mission. I'm sorry to say that I don't believe that you're going to learn this from leadership. You're going to have to do it on your own. So I'm providing you the links in the description here so that you can get started. And I'm happy to discuss any of them with you and to answer any questions. I'll be around. I love you, church. Peace.